Chapter 1. Borrowed Silence. The hotel keycard felt flimsy in Elara's hand, a thin piece of plastic promising a silence she desperately craved. It was a flimsy shield against a world that was too loud, too demanding, too full of scents that reminded her of everything she'd lost. The hallway stretched on, a tunnel of beige carpets and identical wooden doors, each one a portal to a temporary escape. Its air, chilled and recycled, smelled of nothing at all, and that was a blessing. Emptiness was a balm for a soul that had been screaming for years. Her wolf, the other half of her being, was a sleeping thing curled up in the farthest corner of her mind, a ghost she refused to awaken. It had been quiet for so long, ever since the first bond had shattered and taken her faith with it. This trip wasn't for the marketing conference touted in the glossy brochure. It was a flight. An escape from the suffocating pity of her old pack, from the constant unspoken question in their eyes. Why wasn't she enough? Why did fate get it so wrong? Moving down the corridor felt like wading through water, each step a deliberate effort against the bone-deep weariness that had become her constant companion. Her shoulder ached from the weight of her duffel bag, a dull throb that mirrored the ache in her chest. She just wanted a room. 4 walls, a bed, and the sweet, sweet bliss of being unseen. To not be sniffed out, to not be judged, to simply not be. Love, fate, the sacred mate bond. They were all just pretty words for a beautiful cage, and she'd already gnawed her own leg off to get out of the first trap. There would not be a second. The system was broken because the promises it made were lies. It only ever delivered pain, wrapped up in the scent of destiny. Was it too much to ask for a little peace? For one weekend where she didn't have to pretend to be whole? The polished number on the door, 308, gleamed under the flat lights. Home, for now. With a sigh that seemed to release a week's worth of tension, she slid the key into the slot. A small green light blinked, a tiny electronic permission slip. She pushed the heavy door inward, the anticipation of solitude a physical thirst in her throat. The darkness inside was supposed to be a welcome, a void ready to swallow her whole. But this wasn't a void. The air that washed over her wasn't stale or empty. It was alive. Thick with the scent of a pine forest after a thunderstorm, heavy with the aroma of aged leather, and underpinned by something else, something primal and intensely male. A shiver, completely involuntary, traced its way up her spine. Her tired brain took a moment to process the discordance. A suitcase sat open on the luggage rack, clothes spilling out. A jacket was thrown over a chair. This wasn't an empty room. This was the wrong room. Before she could retreat, the door clicked shut behind her, the sound echoing like a death knell in the suddenly charged space. Chapter 2. The Wrong Door. A figure stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, a silhouette against the city lights. He was huge, his shoulders a testament to raw power that seemed to shrink the luxurious suite around him. Elara's breath hitched, her heart, a sluggish drum moments ago, now hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Humiliation washed over her, hot and swift. An apology formed on her lips, a clumsy string of words about the front desk and a mix-up. But they died before they could make a sound. He turned, not with a start, but with a slow, deliberate grace that was more terrifying than any sudden movement. He wasn't just handsome. He was brutally so, with a jaw that looked carved from granite and eyes that weren't just dark. They held the glint of old gold, ancient and predatory. Those eyes didn't just see her. They stripped her bare, cataloging every fear, every scar, every broken piece of her soul. A low vibration started in the room, a hum she could feel in the soles of her feet, rising through her bones. Her hand fumbled for the doorknob, her fingers clumsy and slick with a sudden sweat. Get out! Get out now! The instinct screamed at her, a primal command her body was desperate to obey. But she was frozen, pinned by the sheer intensity of his stare. Something inside her, that dormant, wounded part of her spirit, whimpered. Not in fear, but in recognition. It was a terrifying, unwelcome flicker of life in a place she'd long considered a tomb. He took a step toward her, the sound of his boots on the plush carpet swallowed by the growing rumble that seemed to emanate from his very core. He didn't seem angry. He seemed undone, as if her sudden appearance had torn a hole in his reality. The scent in the room intensified, wrapping around her, suffocating her. It was the scent of dominance, of absolute authority, of a wild thing barely contained by human skin. He was an alpha. Not just any alpha. The power rolling off him was staggering, a physical pressure against her chest. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could see the muscles in his jaw clench and unclench. He opened his mouth, and she braced for a shout, a demand. Instead, a sound ripped from his throat that was utterly inhuman. It was a deep, chest-rattling growl, a sound of pure, undiluted possession that bypassed her ears and slammed directly into her soul. The air crackled with a force she hadn't felt since her first... No, this was stronger, 1,000 times stronger. Then came the word. It wasn't spoken, it was unleashed. A single, guttural syllable that laid a claim on her, branding her spirit in an instant. Mine. The raw, absolute certainty in that sound shattered the last of her control. It was the proclamation she'd run from her entire life. It was the bars of a cage slamming shut. Panic, pure and undiluted, finally broke her paralysis. She ripped the door open and fled, not just from the room, but from the man whose wolf had just declared her his. Forward Chapter 3, An Echo in the Blood. Elara slammed the door to room 318, her actual room, and leaned against it, her entire body trembling. The cheap wood felt solid against her back, the only thing holding her upright as her legs threatened to give way. She couldn't get enough air, each gasp ragged and useless. His scent, that impossible mix of storm and pine and wildness, clung to her clothes, her skin, filling her own sterile room with his suffocating presence. It was a phantom, an invasion. Sinking to the floor, she wrapped her arms around her knees, trying to make herself small, trying to disappear. But there was no hiding from what just happened. There was no hiding from the echo of that growl, or the horrifying resonance of that single damning word. Mine. Fury warred with terror inside her, a sickening, churning storm. She was furious with the universe for its cruel jokes, with him for his arrogance, but most of all, she was furious with herself. Because beneath the panic, a traitorous part of her had responded. Her wolf, the silent partner in her misery for 5 long years, was awake. It wasn't just stirring. It was pacing the walls of its cage, howling with a desperate, joyous energy that made Elara feel physically ill. After her first fated mate, a boy who had looked at her with adoration one day and cold rejection the next, had publicly cast her aside, her wolf had retreated. It had withered under the shame, the heartbreak, the whispers that followed her everywhere. She had nurtured the silence, welcomed it. It was proof that she was in control, that she would never again be a slave to the whims of fate. Now that carefully constructed peace was in ruins. Her wolf was purring, a low thrumming in her chest that she couldn't stop. It was reaching for him, for the alpha in room 308, straining against a leash that was suddenly feeling terrifyingly weak. She would not do this again. She would not let some arrogant alpha drag her back into that world of pain just because his animal instincts flared. She wouldn't be broken a second time. Her phone, dropped in her haste, buzzed against the carpet, the vibration a jarring intrusion. With a shaking hand, she picked it up. An unknown number. The message was short, devoid of pleasantries, and sent a chill of dread right through her. We need to talk. Don't even think about running. I'll hunt you. Lobby bar. 10 minutes. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command, laced with the same unyielding authority as his growl. An alpha's decree. She felt the primal pull of it, a deeply ingrained instinct to obey that she fought with every fiber of her being. The smart thing to do was run, check out, get in her car, and drive until the hotel was just a memory. But the echo in her blood, The hum of this new, terrifying bond had already made the decision for her. She was on her feet, the phone clutched in her hand. Could she really face him? Could she walk willingly toward the one man who represented the very prison she'd escaped? A shiver of pure dread coursed through her, followed by a flicker of something else, a dangerous, unwanted spark of curiosity that she knew could very well be the end of her. Chapter 4. The Hunter's Vow. The hotel bar was a cave of shadows and hushed whispers. It smelled of expensive whiskey and the ghost of 1,000 forgotten conversations. Elara saw him immediately, a king holding court in a kingdom of one. He occupied a corner booth, a monolith of stillness in the dim light, not scanning the room, but simply waiting, as if he had a string tied to her soul and could feel every step she took toward him. Her own resolve, so fierce and bright in the solitude of her room, now felt like a flickering candle flame. She was walking into a predator's den, armed with nothing but the jagged edges of her own broken heart. She told herself she was here to end this, to sever the connection before it could grow. But a deeper, more honest part of her knew she was here because she had no other choice. His command still echoed in her blood. She slid into the vinyl seat opposite him, the table a small, inadequate battlefield between them. Up close, the sheer force of his presence was a physical weight. "It was a mistake," she began, her voice tight, refusing to meet those burning gold eyes. "The room, all of it. Your wolf is wrong." He didn't move. He just watched her, his gaze so intense it felt like a touch. "My wolf," he finally said, his voice a low, gravelly timbre that vibrated through the table, "has never been wrong about anything in my entire life." Elara finally looked up, a spark of anger cutting through her fear. "Well, there's a first time for everything. I am not your mate. I don't want a mate. I especially don't want an arrogant, overbearing alpha who thinks he can order me around, so you are going to call off your wolf and leave me alone." A muscle jumped in his jaw, the only sign that her words had landed. He leaned forward slightly, the motion subtle but full of menace. "You think this is a choice? That I can just turn it off? What my wolf feels, I feel. It has recognized you. That is the end of the story." "No," she said, the word a blade meant to cut him. "This is the end of the story." She stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. She had to get away. She had to show him she wasn't his to command, not his to claim. She turned her back on him, a final act of defiance. And then it happened. A pain so sharp, so blinding. It stole the air from her lungs. It felt like a physical cord deep inside her chest, stretched impossibly tight, had just been ripped in two. She gasped, a strangled cry, stumbling against a nearby table. In a flash, he was on his feet, his own face a mask of agony. "You feel that?" he rasped, his voice raw. The torment in his eyes mirrored her own. "That's the bond. Every time you reject it, every time you run, it will tear us both apart. It will only get worse." Tears welled in her eyes, hot with pain and fury. "Leave me alone," she pleaded, the words broken. He stepped into her space, his shadow engulfing her completely. His voice dropped, no longer a command, but a vow forged in something ancient and unbreakable. "Stay," he whispered, the sound a mix of desperation and steel. "Or I will hunt you to the ends of the earth. I will find you. That is a promise." Chapter 5. Cracks in the Granite. Her room was no longer a sanctuary. It was a cage. His scent, a permanent stain on the air, was a constant reminder of the hunter and his vow. Elara paced the worn carpet, a frantic energy thrumming under her skin. The agony in her chest had subsided to a dull, persistent ache, a phantom limb where the bond had tried to form and she had ripped it away. It was a wound she could feel with every breath. How could this be happening? She had built her life on a foundation of solitude, a fortress designed to keep everyone out, especially alphas who spoke of destiny with fire in their eyes. Destiny was a liar. It promised forever, and delivered abandonment. The memory of her first mate's rejection, his cool dismissal, rose like bile in her throat. He had called her weak, incomplete. She had believed him for so long. Now, another alpha stood at her gates, promising the same gilded cage, and her own traitorous wolf was rattling the bars, eager to be imprisoned once more. A soft knock came at the door, so quiet she almost thought she'd imagined it. But she knew. She felt him on the other side, a magnetic pull she hated herself for recognizing. She opened the door. Cale stood there, his granite expression unreadable, but the tension in his shoulders was plain to see. "We need to talk," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "You can't keep fighting this, Elara." The sound of her name on his lips was a shock, a touch she hadn't permitted. "Watch me," she shot back, her voice shaking with rage. "You don't know anything about me. What happens when your perfect wolf changes its mind, huh? When you realize I'm not some prize to be won? When you find someone better? Someone who isn't already broken?" The words hung in the air, raw and bleeding. For the first time, a crack appeared in his stoic facade, a flicker of something that wasn't anger but a deep, weary frustration. "This is complicated," he admitted, running a hand through his dark hair. The gesture was so human it caught her off guard. "I am Cale, Alpha of the Black Moon Pack. I am here for a summit, a meeting with other territories. My position, it isn't simple. My pack expects me to form an alliance, to choose a mate from a powerful family. Not to find a lone wolf in a hotel hallway." A stray. He didn't say the word, but she heard it anyway. The insult stung, a familiar wound. So that was it. He wanted her. But she was an inconvenience, a political liability. Before she could voice the bitter thought, his phone buzzed, a sharp, demanding sound. He glanced at the screen, and his entire demeanor shifted. The weariness vanished, replaced by a cold, lethal alertness. "We have a problem," he said, his voice dropping low. "He's here. Someone who should not be." Cale's golden eyes locked on hers, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of genuine worry in their depths. A worry for her. "It's Marcus Thorne, Alpha of the Crimson Fang. Stay in this room, lock the door, and do not, under any circumstances, leave." Chapter 6. The Alpha's Gambit. The command to stay put was like a match to a fuse. Elara was not a damsel to be locked in a tower. She was not a possession to be hidden away for her own safety. If she was caught in the middle of some alpha feud, she deserved to know why. She needed air, a space that didn't smell like him, that didn't feel like the walls were closing in. Ignoring the frantic protests of her own common sense, she slipped out of the room and made her way to the hotel's secluded garden. It was a quiet little oasis of manicured hedges and stone benches, lit by the soft glow of moonlight. She thought it would be empty. She was wrong. A man stood by a fountain, his elegant suit a stark contrast to the wildness of the night. He turned as she approached, a smile that was all sharp edges and predatory charm gracing his lips. "I was hoping I might run into you," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "You must be the woman who has Cale so distracted. I'm Marcus Thorne." His scent was sharp, like frost and old blood, a jarring discord after Cale's earthy aroma. An alarm bell screamed in her head. This was the threat. This was the Alpha of the Crimson Fang. "He talks about me?" she asked, keeping her voice steady, betraying none of the fear coiling in her gut. Marcus chuckled, a low, unpleasant sound. "Oh, he doesn't have to. A disruption of his magnitude? The whole summit can feel it. He's usually so controlled. It's a shame, really. An unallied mate, a stray... It's such a liability. A weakness other alphas might be tempted to exploit." His charming facade was slipping, revealing the cold predator beneath. He took a step closer, his eyes raking over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "Perhaps," he murmured, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You'd be better off with a pack that knows how to value its newest acquisitions. His hand shot out, his fingers wrapping around her arm like a steel trap. Panic flared, hot and immediate. Before she could scream, a blur of motion erupted from the shadows. Kyle was there. He hadn't made a sound, but his presence was a thunderclap in the quiet garden. He didn't rush. He didn't shout. He simply moved to stand between her and Marcus, a wall of pure, lethal fury. A growl, lower and more dangerous than any she had heard from him before, rumbled in his chest, a promise of violence that froze Marcus in place. "Take!" Cale snarled, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm level. "Your hand off my mate!" The two words, "my mate," were a detonation in the silent night, a public declaration, a challenge thrown down in front of his most dangerous rival. Marcus's smug smile faltered, replaced by a flash of genuine surprise, which quickly morphed back into a cunning smirk. He released her arm, stepping back with mock deference. "So," Marcus drawled, his eyes gleaming with malice, "the great alpha of Black Moon has finally found his weakness." He turned and sauntered away into the darkness, leaving Elara shaking in the sudden silence. She was trapped, no longer just a woman running from her past, but a pawn in an alpha's deadly game. Chapter 7. The Devil's Den. The moonlight in the garden felt thin and cold after Marcus slunk back into the shadows. The air, thick with unspoken threats, crackled around Elara and the silent alpha beside her. Kyle finally turned, his face a grim mask carved from stone. The smoldering anger was gone, replaced by a chilling certainty. "It's no longer safe for you here," he stated, the words not a suggestion, but a verdict. "You're with me now." He didn't wait for an answer, didn't offer a choice. He simply started walking back toward the hotel, his entire posture a command for her to follow. Numb and reeling, she did. A part of her screamed in protest, furious at being treated like a pawn on his personal chessboard, but a smaller, traitorous part of her felt a sliver of relief. When Marcus had grabbed her, a primal terror had seized her, and when Cale had appeared, she had felt safe. The thought was so dangerous, she immediately tried to crush it. Safety was an illusion. He didn't lead her back to her floor. Instead, the elevator ascended to the very top, opening into a private foyer, the penthouse. He had commandeered the entire floor, turning it into a temporary den for his pack. The moment they stepped inside the main suite, two pairs of eyes snapped to her. A woman with hair the color of midnight and a gaze as sharp as shattered ice stood near the bar. Her scent was crisp, authoritative, a beta. Beside her, a younger man with the build of a fighter and eyes full of open curiosity watched their entrance. Cale's voice cut through the tense silence. "This is Elara," he announced, his hand hovering near the small of her back, not touching but projecting a clear warning. "She is under my protection. She is to be treated as such." The beta, whose name she would learn was Rhea, inclined her head, but her eyes were full of doubt. "An outsider, Alpha?" she questioned, her tone respectful but edged with steel. "At a time like this? It's a risk." Cale's jaw tightened. "It is a risk I have chosen to take." He then turned to Elara, his voice softening just a fraction. "This is my beta, Rhea, and one of my enforcers, Liam." Liam offered a short, polite nod, but Rhea's stare was unwavering, an audit of every weakness Elara possessed. Cale guided her down a short hall, opening the door to a bedroom that was larger than her entire apartment. "You will stay here," he said, the words a gentle prison sentence. "Do not leave this floor without me or Rhea." He closed the door, leaving her alone in the gilded cage. From the massive window, the city lights sparkled like a distant, unreachable galaxy. She was surrounded by wolves, a stranger in their midst, and the only one who offered her protection was the very man who had taken her freedom. Chapter 8. A Breath of Tenderness. The next 2 days were a study in confinement. Elara existed in a state of suspended animation, a ghost haunting the opulent suite, while Kale and his pack moved around her with quiet, deadly purpose. They were at war, or preparing for it, and she was the unwelcome baggage. She and Kale circled each other like wary predators, the air between them thick with unspoken arguments and the simmering heat of their last encounter. He would leave food outside her door, a silent offering she would pointedly ignore. He would watch her from across the room, his golden eyes tracking her every move, his expression a frustrating mix of possession and concern. She hated it. She hated him. But a confusing, dangerous part of her was starting to see the man behind the alpha. She saw the weight of leadership in the tense line of his shoulders and the exhaustion that sometimes shadowed his eyes. And that was a weakness she couldn't afford to have. The truce shattered on the 3rd day. She hadn't eaten, and her defiance had frayed his last nerve. He cornered her in the living area, his large frame blocking her only escape route. "You have to eat," he said, his voice a low growl of frustration. "Do you think starving yourself is some kind of victory?" Elara lifted her chin, her eyes flashing with rebellion. "My well-being is not your concern. You lost any right to that when you decided to make me your prisoner." His hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Prisoner? I am trying to keep you alive. Marcus is not just a rival, Elara. He collects things. He breaks them. Is that what you want?" "What I want," she hissed, stepping right into his space, her anger making her reckless, "is for you to leave me alone. I don't need your protection." "Yes, you do," he roared, the sound vibrating through her, a raw blast of fury and something else. Something that sounded terrifyingly like fear. They were inches apart now, chests heaving, their breaths mingling in the supercharged air. In the heat of the moment, his anger finally broke, crumbling away to reveal a raw, aching vulnerability beneath. His expression softened, his eyes full of a pain that mirrored her own. He reached out, his calloused thumb coming up to gently brush a strand of hair from her cheek. The touch was a spark on dry tinder. It sent a jolt of lightning through her veins, stealing the breath from her lungs and the anger from her heart. His gaze dropped to her lips. Time seemed to stop, the world shrinking to the space between their mouths. He leaned in so slowly, giving her every opportunity to flee. She didn't move. Her body, a traitor to her own resolve, leaned toward his in a silent, desperate surrender. Their lips were a breath apart, a whisper, a promise. When a sharp, urgent knock rattled the suite door, Ria's voice sliced through the spell. "Alpha, there's been a breach at the west stairwell." Chapter 9. Shadows and Teeth. The moment shattered. Kale pulled back as if burned, the raw desire in his eyes instantly replaced by the cold, hard focus of an alpha. He and Ria were gone in a heartbeat, their movements a blur of controlled urgency, leaving Elara standing alone with Liam. The younger enforcer immediately moved to stand in front of her door, his body a solid wall of muscle, his posture tense. The warmth of the almost kiss evaporated, replaced by a cold, prickling dread. A breach. The word sounded sterile, technical, but the alarm in Ria's voice had been anything but. What were they breaching? The quiet of the suite was suddenly terrifying, a held breath waiting for the inevitable exhale of violence. The main lights in the suite flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging the sprawling space into a disorienting darkness. Only the dim orange glow of emergency lights from the hallway offered any illumination. Elara's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. This was real. This was an attack. A crash echoed from the front of the suite, followed by a roar of fury that was pure wolf. Liam let out a low growl, his eyes fixed on the hallway. "Stay behind me," he ordered, his voice a low rumble. "Don't move." The sounds of a brutal struggle, snarls, the sickening thud of bodies hitting walls, grew closer. Elara pressed herself against the wall, her mind screaming. She was a liability, a weakness. Marcus had called her a weakness, and now he was here to prove it. The main door to the suite burst inward. torn from its hinges. Two enormous shapes filled the doorway, their forms indistinct in the gloom, but their eyes glowed with a faint predatory red. They smelled of frost and blood. Crimson fang. They were here for her. With a deafening roar, Liam shifted, his human form exploding into a massive gray wolf. He met them head-on, a whirlwind of claws and teeth. The fight was savage, a chaotic dance of shadows and violence. Elara was frozen, a spectator to the carnage. One of the intruders, faster than the other, sidestepped Liam's lunge, its red eyes locking directly onto her. It ignored the fight, its sole purpose clear. It was coming for the Alpha's weakness. It launched itself across the room, a missile of muscle and fury. She had a split second to see claws extend, to smell the stench of its breath. She closed her eyes, bracing for the impact, for the tearing of flesh. It never came. A sound like a thunderclap filled the room as a black-furred demon slammed into her attacker, driving it into the far wall with enough force to crack the plaster. Kyle. He was here, in his full wolf form. A beast twice the size of the others, a terrifying engine of destruction. He stood over her, a protective shield of snarling muscle, and turned his head. His golden eyes, blazing with unrestrained fury, met hers for a single heart-stopping moment. In that silent gaze, she saw it all. This wasn't about politics. It wasn't about a summit. It was about her. And he would burn the world to ashes before he let anyone lay a hand on her. Chapter 13. An indelible claim. The skin on her neck tingled, a constant phantom touch that was both a comfort and a violation. Elara stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, at the faint blush of pink on her skin where his teeth had grazed her. It was invisible to human eyes, a secret brand that screamed his possession to any shifter who crossed her path. Her wolf, a creature she had once starved into silence, was now a purring, contented beast, basking in the security of the claim. But the woman staring back in the mirror? She was shaking with a cold, hard fury. He had done it again. He had taken a choice that was hers and hers alone. She had spent 5 years building walls to protect her freedom, and in a single possessive act, he had breached them all. The worst part was the insidious warmth that spread through her veins every time she thought of it, a traitorous feeling of belonging she both craved and despised. She stormed out of the bedroom, her anger a shield. Cale was standing by the massive window, looking out at the sprawling city below as if he owned it. He didn't turn when she approached, but the tension in his broad shoulders told her he knew exactly why she was there. "How could you?" she demanded, her voice low and trembling with rage. "After everything I told you, after explaining how I was trapped and rejected, how could you put your mark on me like I'm some kind of property?" He finally turned to face her, and there was no apology in his eyes, only a raw, unyielding certainty that stole her breath. "Property? No," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Never. You are the other half of my soul, and I will do whatever it takes to keep you safe." "By taking away my choices?" she shot back, her heart hammering. "By branding me like livestock? You're just like him, just like all the other alphas who think power gives them the right to own people." The accusation hung in the air between them, sharp and poisonous. For a moment, she thought she saw a flicker of pain in his golden eyes, a crack in the granite facade. He took a step closer, his gaze burning with an emotion so fierce it was almost frightening. It wasn't just possession. It was a desperate, aching devotion. "When you told me what that boy did to you," he began, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. "And then I saw those wolves coming for you. Something inside me broke. The alpha, the man. Everything demanded I make sure the entire world knew you were mine to protect. The mark wasn't a strategy, Elara. It was an instinct I couldn't have stopped if I tried." He reached out, his hand hovering just inches from her face. "I will not let them hurt you again," he vowed, the words a sacred oath. "I would rather die than let you go." His raw sincerity was a tidal wave, crashing over her anger and leaving her shaken, breathless, and terrifyingly vulnerable. Chapter 14. The Predator's Trap. Kyle's vow echoed in the silence of the suite long after he was gone. He had been summoned to an emergency meeting with the other alphas, a tense summit to address Marcus's blatant aggression. He left her in the care of Rhea and Liam, but the room still felt full of his presence, his promise a warm, protective weight around her. For the first time, Elara allowed herself to feel the pull of the bond without fighting it. It was a humming, golden thread that connected her to him, a source of strength she was only just beginning to understand. Rhea sat with her, the beta's icy demeanor having thawed to a grudging respect after the attack. An unspoken truce had formed between them, a shared understanding that Elara's safety was now paramount to the pack's survival. The fragile peace was shattered by the shrill, piercing scream of the hotel fire alarm. Red lights flashed, painting the walls in frantic, pulsing strokes. Liam was instantly on his feet, his body tense. "Stay put," he ordered. "It's a tactic. They're trying to draw us out." Chaos erupted in the hallway, the sounds of shouting and running feet filtering through the door. Elara's heart pounded, a frantic drum against the siren's wail. And then, a scent. It slipped under the door, a phantom from another life. Wildflowers and clean pine, the smell of the Silver Creek forest, the scent of her childhood, the scent of Julian. It was a lure, a ghost sent to drag her back into the past. Rhea was called away by another enforcer to manage the evacuation, leaving Elara alone with Liam and the ghost in the air. "Don't," Liam warned, seeing the look on her face. But it was too late. The scent was a hook, pulling on a part of her she thought had died. She had to see. Ignoring Liam's frantic protest, she pulled the suite door open just a crack. Julian stood in the hallway alone amidst the chaos. He looked older, his face harder, but the blue eyes were the same. "Elara," he said, his voice urgent. "I can get you out of here. Marcus is insane. He'll kill you to get to Kale. Let me help you." It was the lie her broken heart desperately wanted to believe. For a single stupid second, she saw the boy she used to love, not the man who had shattered her world. Liam moved to pull her back, but it was too late. Figures erupted from the stairwell door, moving with silent, deadly speed. Crimson Fang enforcers. They swarmed Liam, tackling him with silver-laced nets that sizzled against his skin. It was a trap. A perfectly executed, brutal trap. Marcus Thorne himself stepped out from behind Julian, a triumphant, cruel smirk twisting his lips. He looked at her, his eyes gleaming with victory. "The weakness," he purred, secured. The last thing she saw before a sweet-smelling cloth was pressed over her mouth was Julian's face. There was no remorse in his eyes, only a cold, chilling emptiness. Chapter 15. The Point of No Return. Consciousness returned in jarring fits and starts. The smell of gasoline, the rumble of an engine, the rough texture of a burlap sack scratching her cheek. Elara's eyes fluttered open to darkness, the rhythmic jostling of a moving vehicle her only orientation. Her hands were bound behind her, the plastic zip tie biting into her wrists. Panic tried to claw its way up her throat, but she swallowed it down, replacing it with a cold, hard fury. The despair was gone. The victim was gone. In her place was something new, something forged in betrayal and tempered by a promise. She was not a prize to be taken. Across from her, Julian's silhouette was barely visible in the gloom, his face an unreadable mask. He hadn't said a word since they'd thrown her in the van. He was a ghost at his own haunting. The vehicle screeched to a halt, throwing her against the wall. A deafening crash, the sound of metal being torn apart, echoed from outside. Before anyone could react, the back doors of the van were ripped from their hinges as if they were made of paper. Light flooded the dark space, framing the most terrifying and beautiful sight Elara had ever seen. Kale. He stood there, a vision of pure, unrestrained wrath, his golden eyes glowing with an infernal light. His pack was behind him, a wave of snarling fury ready to crash down. The world exploded into chaos. The fight was a brutal, swirling vortex of shifting wolves, flashing silver, and the guttural roars of battle. Cale ignored it all. He had only one target. He launched himself toward the van, toward her. But Marcus was there to meet him, a clash of two titans that shook the ground. As they fought, Julian grabbed Elara, yanking her from the van and pressing the cold, flat edge of a silver knife to her throat. "Cale!" Julian screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. "Call off your wolves or she dies!" Cale froze, his body locked in a struggle with Marcus, his face a mask of pure agony. He was trapped. To save her, he had to surrender. To fight, he risked her life. Marcus laughed, seeing his advantage, and pressed his attack. Julian started dragging Elara toward a second vehicle, her one chance of rescue slipping away. She had a choice. She could be the damsel, the weakness that got the hero killed. Or she could fight. Her eyes darted around, landing on a rusty metal pipe lying on the grimy warehouse floor. In one fluid, desperate motion, she chose. She brought her heel down, hard, on Julian's instep. He grunted, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. It was all she needed. She dropped, twisting out of his grasp, scooped up the pipe, and swung it with all her might against his knee. A wet crack echoed in the night, followed by his howl of pain. The sound made Marcus flinch, a fatal, split-second distraction. It was the only opening Cale needed. With a final, brutal roar, he ended the fight. Elara stood, chest heaving, pipe in hand, her choice made. She hadn't waited to be saved. She had entered the battle. She had chosen his side. There was no turning back now. Chapter 16. The Serpent's Tooth victory was a dizzying, intoxicating thing. The dust of the battle settled, leaving a tableau of defeated wolves and the sharp, coppery scent of blood in the air. Julian was a whimpering heap on the ground, and Marcus was down, his body still and broken. But Elara only had eyes for one person. Cale, his human form returned, crossed the space between them in 3 long strides, his face a mask of raw, unfiltered relief. He ignored the cuts on his arms, the dirt smearing his skin. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently stroking her cheeks, as if to assure himself she was real. "You fought," he breathed, the words a prayer, a miracle. "Elara, you fought back." In his eyes she saw not just love, but a fierce, burning pride. He didn't see a weakness or a liability. He saw a warrior, a queen. And in that moment, the last of her walls crumbled to dust, leaving her heart completely and utterly exposed to him. She leaned into his touch, a laugh bubbling up from her chest, a wild, incredulous sound of pure joy. They were alive. They had won. The bond between them flared, no longer a painful pull, but a brilliant golden sun warming her from the inside out. They had faced the ghosts of her past and the demons of his present, and they were still standing. The future, a concept she hadn't dared to consider for years, suddenly felt possible. It felt like him. But a serpent, even one with a broken back, can still bite. From the ground, Marcus coughed, a wet, rattling sound. While all eyes had been on their reunion, he had made one final, desperate move. Julian, seeing his alpha about to be dispatched by Cale's closing pack, let out a terrified scream. "Cale! Look out!" It happened in a horrifying heartbeat of slow motion. Cale spun, his instincts screaming. He shoved Elara behind him, a human shield against a threat he couldn't yet see. Marcus was on his feet, swaying, a thin blade of dark, gleaming silver in his hand. It wasn't just silver, it was coated in a black, viscous poison, a killer of alphas. Cale met the lunge, but there was no time to shift, no time to fully deflect. He took the blow for her. The poisoned dagger slid into his side with a sickening sound, a final, cruel stroke of venom. A roar of pure, unadulterated agony ripped from Cale's throat as he threw Marcus away from him, the man's body hitting the warehouse wall with a final, definitive crack. But the damage was done. Dark, thick blood, black at the edges from the wolfsbane, poured from the wound. Cale staggered, his strength draining away with terrifying speed. He dropped to his knees, his golden eyes finding hers, a universe of apology in their fading light. The victory turned to ash. Her heart, so full of hope a moment ago, shattered. This was her fault. Love didn't save. It only ever destroyed. Chapter 17. A Cloak of Betrayal. Chaos was a living thing. The triumphant howls of the Black Moon Pack died in their throats, replaced by growls of panic and fury. Rhea was shouting orders, her voice sharp with a desperation that cut through the night air. They formed a protective circle around their fallen alpha, a wall of shifting bodies and bared teeth. Elara was on her knees beside Cale, her hands pressed against the horrific wound, trying to stop the flow of his life, which was spilling out onto the cold concrete. The poison was working fast. His skin was pale, his breathing shallow. His connection to her through the bond was flickering, a candle flame guttering in a storm. He was dying. They were losing him. "We have to move!" A voice cut through her terror-induced haze. Liam, the young enforcer, pushed his way into the circle, his face a mask of grim urgency. "The authorities will be here any second. We can't be found like this. I'll get him to the car." Rhea hesitated, her eyes narrowed with suspicion at everyone and everything, but the logic was undeniable. They were exposed. With a curt nod, she agreed. "Go. We'll handle the cleanup and meet you at the safe house." Elara didn't hesitate. She helped Liam lift Cale, whose body was a dead weight, his head lolling against her shoulder. His scent, usually so full of strength and life, was now faint, tainted by the sickly sweet smell of wolfsbane and death. They half-dragged, half-carried him toward their armored SUV, every step an eternity. Hope was a tiny, foolish flicker. If they could just get him away, get him help, maybe they could fight the poison. Maybe they weren't too late. They reached the vehicle, its black paint gleaming under the harsh industrial lights. As Liam reached for the door handle, he suddenly shoved Elara, hard. She stumbled, falling to the rough pavement, her hands scraping against the asphalt. "I'm sorry, Elara," he said, and the regret in his voice was the most sickening lie she had ever heard. Before Rhea and the others could react to the sudden betrayal, more figures melted out of the shadows. Crimson Fang wolves. They weren't there to fight. They were an honor guard. Julian, his knee grotesquely swollen, hobbled forward and opened the door to a different car, a sleek, black sedan. With a final grunt of effort, Liam pushed Cale's dying body into the back seat. The trap hadn't been to abduct her. It had been to use her to lure Cale out, to wound him, and to capture him. And Liam, the friendly, loyal wolf, had been a traitor all along. The car door slammed shut, a sound of absolute finality. The sedan's tires squealed as it sped off into the night, taking Cale, her mate, her hope, with it. Elara was left on the ground, alone, with nothing but the smell of his blood on her hands and the ashes of trust in her heart. Chapter 18. The Howl and the Heartbeat. The silence in the penthouse suite was a physical weight, pressing down on Elara until she could barely breathe. The broken furniture and shattered glass were a perfect reflection of her own spirit. Rhea was a phantom, moving through the rooms, her voice a clipped, emotionless monotone as she spoke into her phone, trying to salvage a situation that was beyond repair. The pack was broken. Their alpha was gone, delivered into the hands of their mortal enemy by one of their own. And Elara was gone too. She had retreated to a place deep inside herself, a cold, empty cavern where feeling couldn't reach her. She sat on the floor, her back against the couch, Cale's dried blood a dark stain on her skin. The little voice that had whispered to her for 5 years that she was broken, that she was a curse, was now screaming its victory lap. "See?" it shrieked. "You let yourself love him. You let yourself hope. And you destroyed him just like you destroy everything you touch." The memory of Julian's rejection played in her mind, no longer a fuzzy, painful memory, but a scene of crystal-clear clarity. His cold eyes, his dismissive words. That was the beginning. That was the first domino. She had spent 5 years running from that moment, but she saw it now with a horrifying new perspective. Her flaw wasn't that she had been rejected. Her flaw was that she had believed it. She had accepted the verdict that she was weak and had spent her life trying to outrun the ghost of that judgment. She ran from her pack. She ran from the bond. She ran from Cale's terrifying, wonderful love, and all her running had done was lead him right into a cage. The despair was absolute, a black ocean pulling her under. She was so tired of fighting. It would be so easy to just let go, to sink into the cold, quiet dark. Just as the last of her fight was about to flicker out, a sound echoed in the vast silence of her soul. A howl. It wasn't a sound of pain or grief. It was a sound of pure, untamed rage. It was her wolf. The creature she had muzzled and chained for half a decade was no longer sleeping. It was awake. It was furious. It raged against her despair, against her surrender, clawing at the walls of the prison she had built for it. It was screaming a single, undeniable truth into her mind. The bond, that golden thread that connected her to Cale, was stretched thin and taut with his agony, but it was not broken. He was alive. He was hurt. He was captured. But he was fighting. He fights, the wolf howled, a command and an accusation. So you must fight. The despair didn't just recede. It shattered. It was burned away by a firestorm of cold, clear resolve. She had been rejected, betrayed, and abducted, and she had survived it all. She wasn't a curse. She was a survivor. She got to her feet, the hollow space inside her filling with a white-hot purpose. She would not lose him. Not again. This time, she wasn't running. This time, she was the hunter. Chapter 19. The Unbroken. Elara rose from the floor, the ghost of Cale's blood on her skin no longer a stain of guilt, but a declaration of war. She moved through the wrecked penthouse, her steps silent and sure, her purpose a tangible force that cut through the despair hanging in the air. Ria was barking orders into a phone, her voice strained, trying to hold together the shattered remnants of her pack. The few enforcers left were adrift, their alpha gone, their trust betrayed, their world reduced to a single gilded cage. Elara walked directly to the beta, waiting patiently until the call ended. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was Ria who broke it, her eyes full of a weary, pitying anger. "There's nothing you can do," she said, her voice flat. "Go. Run. It's what you're good at. He would want you to be safe." The old Elara would have agreed. She would have seen the open door and fled. But the old Elara was gone, burned away in the fire of the last 24 hours. "No," she replied, her voice calm and cold as a river stone. "Cale is alive. I can feel him." Ria's expression hardened. "Grief can make—" "It's not grief," Elara interrupted, her gaze unwavering. "It's the bond. It's weak. It's full of pain, but it's there. It's a thread. And I can follow it right to him. We are going on the offensive." The beta let out a harsh, incredulous laugh. "We? You are not Pack. You are the reason he is gone. You are an outsider, a weakness." The words that would have once shattered her now glanced off her armor. "You're wrong," Elara said, taking a step closer, her voice dropping but gaining an intensity that made Ria flinch. "You're right. I'm not like you. I spent 5 years being hunted by the shame of my past. I learned to suppress my scent, to hide my presence, to make my wolf a ghost inside me. My rejection didn't break me. It forged me into something different. I am not a pack wolf who radiates territory and challenge. I can move through their world like a whisper. I am not your weakness, Ria. I am your secret weapon." The revelation hung in the air, a stunning, undeniable truth. Her greatest wound was her greatest strength, Her status as a stray, an outsider, was the very thing that could let her slip through the enemy's grasp. For the first time, Rhea truly saw her. Not as the alpha's stray, but as a wolf who had survived the unthinkable and come out stronger. A queen. A Luna. After a long, searching moment, the beta gave a single, sharp nod. "What is the plan?" she asked, her voice now laced with a new, grudging respect. Elara's eyes turned toward the window, toward the dark city that held her mate. "The plan," she said, her voice like steel, "is we stop reacting. We are going to walk into that snake pit and we are going to take our alpha back." Chapter 20. The Queen's Gambit. Their destination was a scar on the city's edge, an abandoned chemical plant, its skeletal towers clawing at the night sky. It was Marcus Thorne's den. Intel from Rhea's contacts confirmed he had consolidated his forces there, creating a fortress of brick and steel. A direct assault would be a massacre. Kale's remaining pack was strong, but they were outnumbered and, more importantly, they were without their alpha. Despair was a poison that could cripple even the strongest wolf, but Elara's plan was not about brute force. It was about deception. It was a queen's gambit, where the most valuable piece on the board offered itself as a sacrifice. While Rhea and the others prepared to launch a loud, furious diversion at the main gate, a display of hopeless aggression, Elara would be the ghost. She would slip in through the cracks. She moved through the blighted industrial landscape, a shadow among shadows. For years, she had practiced the art of being invisible, of muting the very essence of her wolf until she smelled of nothing but human and rain. It was a skill born of shame, but tonight, it was a weapon. She found what she was looking for, a wide storm drain, its grate rusted but loose. While Marcus's sentries watched the main road, their senses primed for the scent of Black Moon warriors, she slipped into the belly of the beast, unheard and undetected. Inside, the complex was a maze of echoing corridors and the stench of decay. She kept one part of her mind focused on the thin, golden thread of the bond, a lifeline pulling her deeper into enemy territory. It led her to a sub-level, a command center of sorts where Julian was directing their defenses. He stood over a table of blueprints, his injured knee propped up on a chair, barking orders into a radio. He was so consumed with the impending battle, he never sensed her approach. "Was it worth it?" she whispered from the deepest shadows of the room. Julian spun around, his hand flying to the silver knife at his belt, his eyes wide with shock. "You," he breathed. "How?" "You always underestimated me," she said, stepping into the dim light. She didn't look like the broken girl he had cast aside. She looked like a queen surveying her domain. "You traded your honor for a place at this monster's feet. But what happens when Kale is gone, Julian? Do you really think a man like Marcus Thorne shares power? He'll discard you like he does everyone else." Her words were quiet, not a threat, but a simple, devastating prophecy. She was planting a seed of doubt, using his own ambition as a weapon against him. While his mind reeled, trying to process the ghost who had come back to haunt him, she simply melted back into the darkness. The path to Kale was now clear. Chapter 21. Two Halves of a Whole. The bond led her down, deeper into the complex's cold, concrete heart. The thrumming grew stronger, a desperate heartbeat in the dark. She found him in a small, sterile room that smelled of antiseptic and despair. He was chained to the far wall, his wrists and ankles bound in thick silver manacles that sizzled against his skin. The wolfsbane had done its work. His face was a pale, drawn mask of agony, his breathing shallow. But he was alive, and when he lifted his head, his golden eyes, though clouded with pain, widened with a disbelieving, radiant light when they saw her. A surge of pure, white-hot fury washed through Elara, burning away the last of her fear. Seeing him like this, so diminished, so hurt, it was unbearable. It was unforgivable. "I'm here," she whispered, her voice a low, steady anchor in his sea of pain as she pulled a pair of heavy bolt cutters from the bag slung over her shoulder. "I told you, No more running. She worked quickly, snapping the thick steel chains that connected the silver cuffs to the wall. He was too weak to help, his body trembling with the effort of just staying conscious. I knew you would come, he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. Even when my wolf was screaming, I could feel you, coming for me. With a final, loud snap, the last chain fell away. He slumped forward, and she caught him, his weight a heavy, precious burden. He was free from the wall, but still too weak to stand alone, the silver still poisoning his system. How touching, a voice purred from the doorway. Marcus Thorne stood there, flanked by two of his largest enforcers. A cruel, satisfied smile played on his lips. The broken little stray, come to rescue her dying alpha, a truly pathetic end to a once great legacy. He had known she was here. He had let her get this far, wanting to savor the moment of her ultimate failure. But when he looked at Elara, he didn't see the broken girl he expected. He saw a wolf baring her teeth. Without a second thought, she moved to stand in front of Kale, a shield for the weakened man who had shielded her. He is not dying, she said, her voice ringing with the force of an unbreakable vow. And I am not broken. Leaning on her for support, a low growl rumbling in his chest, Kale struggled to his feet. He was swaying, his strength all but gone, but he was standing. He draped a heavy arm over her shoulder, not just for balance, but in a gesture of absolute solidarity. They faced their enemy together, the wounded Alpha and his unbroken Luna. At that exact moment, the sound of a full-scale assault erupted from above. Rhea had begun her attack. Marcus was trapped. The final battle had just begun. Our Chapter 22. 2 wolves, 1 soul. The roar of battle from the floors above was a distant thunderstorm, a soundtrack to the silent, lethal confrontation in the basement. Marcus Thorne laughed, a low, guttural sound that echoed in the cold room. He saw a dying alpha and a terrified stray, an easy victory to cap off his bloody ambition. I'm going to enjoy this, he snarled, his body beginning to contort, bones snapping and reforming as he embraced his monstrous other self. He rose as a massive wolf, its fur the color of dried blood, its eyes glowing with malice. He lunged, a blur of speed and brutal intent. Kale, still too weak from the poison to shift, moved with the desperate grace of a seasoned warrior, shoving Elara behind him and meeting the attack in his human form. He dodged the snapping jaws, his movements slower than usual, but precise, honed by a lifetime of combat. Elara refused to be a spectator in the fight for her own future. She grabbed the rusty pipe from the floor, its weight a solid, comforting presence in her hands. While Kale played the matador, drawing Marcus's attention, she became the thorn in the beast's side. She swung the pipe with all her might, cracking it against the wolf's hind legs again and again. The blows weren't enough to break bone, but they were enough to disrupt his rhythm, to make him stumble, to create the split-second openings Kale needed to survive. They fought as a single, coordinated unit, his experience and her unpredictable ferocity. Enraged by their seamless dance of defiance, Marcus finally feinted toward Elara, drawing Kale into a reckless block and then spun, landing a devastating blow with his powerful claws. Kale crashed to the floor, a strangled cry of pain torn from his lips. Marcus turned on Elara, his lips peeled back in a triumphant snarl, ready to deliver the killing blow. With his last ounce of strength, Kale reached for her not with his hands, but with his mind. He pushed everything he had left down the golden thread of the bond, his power, his will to live, his absolute unconditional trust in her. It was a torrent of raw, primal energy that slammed into Elara's soul. Her own wolf, awakened and empowered by his sacrifice, roared to the surface. She didn't fully shift, but the world exploded into a new spectrum of sight and sound. A low growl ripped from her throat, her nails elongating into claws, her eyes blazing with a golden light that mirrored his. She was something new, something more. As Marcus lunged, she met him head-on, driving the sharp, jagged end of the pipe up into the soft flesh beneath his jaw. The beast roared in agony, and in that moment of vulnerability, Cale surged from the floor, plunging a broken shard of a silver chain deep into Marcus's chest. The great wolf shuddered and collapsed, shifting back into the form of a dying man. He looked at Elara, a bloody, rattling laugh bubbling from his lips. "Julian," he choked out. "He never betrayed you. I made him choose. Your life, or his pack. He chose you." Chapter 23, The Weight of the Crown. The battle was over. The silence that descended upon the basement was heavier and more profound than the preceding chaos. Rhea and the Black Moon warriors stormed the room moments later, their weapons ready, only to find a scene of impossible victory. Marcus Thorne was dead, and Elara stood over him, pipe still clutched in her hand, her face splattered with blood, a terrifying and beautiful avenging angel. Cale was on the floor, conscious but barely, the silver shard still embedded in the enemy beside him. The immediate threat was gone, but the cost was etched on every surface, in every exhausted face. The war was over, but now the accounting had to be done. Rhea took command with a brisk, blessed efficiency, dispatching warriors to secure the building and calling for the pack's medics. In the controlled chaos, Elara found Julian. He was slumped against a wall where she had left him, his knee a mangled ruin, his face a pale mask of shame. He wouldn't meet her eyes. The hatred she had carried for him for 5 years felt like a distant memory, replaced by a vast, weary sadness. "Marcus told me," she said, her voice quiet. "He said you chose me." Julian finally looked up, his blue eyes swimming with unshed tears, the ghost of the boy she once knew visible for the first time in years. "He was going to destroy Silver Creek," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "He wanted your bloodline. Said it was unique. He would have hunted you down and killed you. The only way I could protect you was to stand by his side, to guide the hunt myself. I never thought." He trailed off, his shame too great for words. It wasn't forgiveness she felt, but a bitter, painful understanding. A sense of closure for a wound that had defined her for so long. She turned away from the past and back to her future. The medics were working frantically on Cale, their faces grim. The poison had taken too deep a hold, and the battle had used up the last of his reserves. Just as a healer was about to administer a stabilizing agent, Cale's body went rigid. A single, agonized gasp escaped his lips. His eyes, which had been fixed on Elara, rolled back into his head, and he went limp. "He's crashing," someone yelled. "I've lost his pulse." The bond, the beautiful golden thread that had been her anchor and her strength, went terrifyingly slack. It didn't break. It just went silent. A cold, empty void opened up where he had been. She had fought her way through hell to get him back, only to watch him slip through her fingers at the very end. The weight of the crown he had unknowingly placed on her head suddenly felt impossibly heavy. Chapter 24, A Home in the Heart. The world became a blur of frantic movement and panicked shouts, but Elara existed at the still center of the storm. They moved him back to the penthouse, the healers swarming around his still form, their knowledge and magic a desperate assault against the poison that had claimed him. Elara refused to move from his side. She held his limp, cooling hand in hers, a silent, desperate vigil. The bond was a faint, whisper-thin thread in the void, a single strand of spider silk threatening to snap at any moment. She closed her eyes and focused on it, pouring everything she was into that fragile connection. She sent him her strength, her stubbornness, her will to live. She poured her love down that thread, a silent plea, a fierce command. "Don't you dare leave me. Come back. Come home." Hours bled into a timeless, gray expanse. The healers worked until their energy was spent, their faces etched with defeat. They had done all they could. It was up to his spirit now. But Elara did not give up. She kept her grip on his hand and talked to him, her voice a low, steady murmur in the quiet room. She told him about the girl who had been so afraid to trust, She told him about the woman he had shown her she could be. She told him about the future she now wanted more than anything. A future filled with his scent, his laughter, his steady presence by her side. She was no longer pushing him away. She was weaving a net of love and memory, pulling him back from the precipice, back to her. And somewhere in the darkness, his spirit heard her call. A faint pressure, a twitch of his fingers in hers. The healers rushed forward, but Elara's gaze was fixed on his face. His eyelids fluttered. Then, they opened. The brilliant gold was hazy, clouded with pain, but it was there, and it was focused on her. "Elara," he breathed, his voice a dry, scratchy whisper. The bond, so faint and fragile, flared back to life, a radiant, joyful sun that banished the cold from her soul. The poison was broken. He was back. Weeks later, Kale stood before his pack. His strength returned, his arm wrapped firmly around Elara's waist. He introduced her not as his fated mate, not as a stray he had saved, but as the Luna who had walked into the heart of the fire to bring her alpha home. That night, in the quiet of their room, he knelt before her. "My wolf claimed you in arrogance and instinct," he said, his voice thick with an emotion that made her heart ache. "Now, the man is asking. The man who is alive because of you. Be my mate, Elara, my equal, my partner in everything." Tears of pure, unadulterated joy streamed down her face as she whispered, "Yes." He rose, and with a tenderness that spoke of utter reverence, he finally gave her the true mate's bite. It was not a brand of ownership. It was a promise, a seal, the final, perfect note in a song of two souls. She was home.